What if your peaceful gathering turned into a scene of horror within minutes? This is the reality for the residents of Tudun Diri, a village near Kaduna, northern Nigeria. On the night of December 3, 2023, the Nigerian military launched an airstrike on a religious gathering. The serene atmosphere was shattered by the deafening roar of explosions, and the once joyful gathering was turned into a horrifying spectacle of chaos and destruction. As if this was not devastating enough, a second strike followed just 30 minutes later. This time, the victims included those who had rushed to the scene to rescue the victims of the initial strike. The aftermath was a chilling scene of over 120 civilians, men, women, and children, whose lives were abruptly ended. The Nigerian military, responsible for the protection of these very civilians, was now the author of their untimely demise. In the wake of this tragedy, the Nigerian military offered two contradictory explanations. The Nigerian army in Kaduna initially stated that the airstrike was a tragic mistake. However, this was quickly followed by a statement from Nigeria's defense headquarters claiming that suspected bandits had embedded themselves amongst the civilians. This inconsistency in their statements raises questions about the military's regard for civilian lives and suggests attempts to obscure the truth of these grave human rights violations. The reality remains that innocent lives were lost, and a peaceful village was transformed into a war zone within minutes. In the aftermath of the strikes, victims were hastily buried in two mass graves on December 4th. 77 people were interred in one grave, while over 17 individuals from a nearby village who had attended the religious ceremony were buried in another. Dozens severely injured are currently receiving treatment at Kaduna's main hospital. These are the forgotten civilians, innocent lives lost, families broken, and a community devastated. It's a grim reminder of the human cost of conflict and the urgent need for transparency, accountability, and justice. This is not just a story of a tragic event, but a call to action for those in power to ensure such a tragedy does not repeat itself. Opening: how does one reconcile two contradictory explanations for such a catastrophic event? Picture this: a village in northern Nigeria, Tudun Diri, becomes the unintended target of two military airstrikes. Over 120 lives lost within the span of 30 minutes. A community shaken to its core. Yet the narrative surrounding this tragedy is muddled with inconsistencies and contradictions. The Nigerian military on one hand initially claims that the airstrike was an unfortunate mistake, but then the defense headquarters counters this with a statement saying that suspected bandits had embedded themselves within the civilian population. Two starkly different accounts, both coming from the same authority. This raises a critical question. Which version of events should we believe? Amnesty International Nigeria, a beacon of human rights advocacy, is calling out these conflicting statements as attempts to cover up a grave violation. They argue that the Nigerian military's disregard for civilian lives is apparent in the stark contradiction between their explanations. The authorities' attempts to shroud this disaster in confusion and uncertainty are seen as a blatant disrespect for justice. Furthermore, the Nigerian government's handling of the incident has been called into question. Despite the gravity of the event, there has been a glaring lack of thorough and transparent investigation. More than 120 innocent lives were lost, and yet the quest for truth and accountability seems to be a secondary concern for the authorities. This isn't just about reconciling two differing accounts. This is about a government's responsibility to its people, to ensure transparency, uphold justice, and most importantly, protect civilian lives. The lack of an independent, impartial, and transparent investigation into the Tudun Diri village airstrike is a stark reminder of the Nigerian authorities' persistent failure to hold the military accountable. Closing: the victims' families and the citizens of Nigeria are left in the dark, awaiting justice. They deserve answers, they deserve to know the truth, and above all, they deserve justice for the lives lost in this tragic event. What if this wasn't the first time? What if it's becoming a routine? A chilling thought indeed, and unfortunately it's closer to the truth than we'd like to believe. Our journey through the chilling incidents takes us back to the 18th of December 2022, where Mutumji village in Zamfara state was struck by an airstrike by the Nigerian Air Force. The result? 64 innocent lives lost. A number, a statistic that fails to encapsulate the grief, the loss, the devastation experienced by those left behind. Jumping forward to the 24th of January 2023, another military airstrike struck with deadly consequences. This time in Doma, a region in Nasarawa state, where over 40 herders lost their lives. A mere month into the new year, and the death toll was already rising. In that same month, tragedy struck again. This time in Galadimakogo, a village in Niger State, central Nigeria. Dozens of vigilantes, individuals who took it upon themselves to protect their community, were wiped out by yet another military airstrike. With each strike, with each loss of life, we see a consistent and disappointing trend. The failure of the Nigerian military to thoroughly, independently, impartially, transparently, and effectively investigate these incidents. The victims and their families are left without answers, without justice. The perpetrators are left without consequence, without accountability. This cycle of violence, of loss, of impunity, is not just a failing on the part of the military, it's a failing on the part of the authorities. Their failure to hold the military to account is fostering an environment of impunity. It's sending a message that these actions, these atrocities, are without consequence. The lack of accountability is not just encouraging impunity, but it's also endangering the lives of those the military is supposed to protect. A dire situation indeed, a situation that demands change, that demands justice, and it's up to us to ensure it happens. As we delve deeper into this tragic event, we must ask, is this the deadliest strike in recent history? Let's consider the grim comparison. The airstrike on Tudun Diri in December 2023 resulted in the death of over 120 civilians. This horrific incident is eerily reminiscent of an earlier tragedy that occurred in 2017. In the early days of that year, the Nigerian military launched an airstrike on Ran village, causing the loss of 115 civilian lives. The Ran village attack was, until recently, considered the deadliest airstrike in the country's history. But with the recent events in Tudun Diri, it seems this dubious title has now been passed on. The victims of the Tudun Diri airstrike were largely attendees of a religious gathering, making the incident all the more tragic. Just as in Ran village, many of these individuals were not involved in any form of conflict. They were ordinary people, leading ordinary lives, who found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. What makes the Tudun Diri airstrike stand out is not just the high death toll, but also the nature of the event. A second airstrike was launched roughly 30 minutes after the first, killing dozens more, including those who had rushed to the scene to rescue victims of the initial strike. This double strike strategy has amplified the devastation and loss, making it one of the deadliest incidents in recent memory. The Nigerian military's failure to investigate these incidents effectively and transparently adds a layer of injustice to the tragedy. With each airstrike that ends in civilian casualties, the echoes of the forgotten victims grow louder, demanding accountability and justice. The echoes of this horrifying event continue to reverberate, leaving an indelible stain on Nigeria's history. The Tudun Diri incident is indeed the deadliest strike since the Ran village attack, a somber reminder of the grave cost of military errors and the urgent need for accountability. How long will the cries for justice go unheard? A question that echoes in the hearts of the victims of the airstrikes in northern Nigeria, and one that has been taken up by Amnesty International Nigeria. The organization has issued a resounding call for an independent inquiry into the incident that occurred in early December of 2023. The tragedy of the Tudun Diri village airstrike is not just a singular event, but part of an alarming pattern. The Nigerian military's response to the incident has been marked by contradiction and ambiguity. An initial statement deemed the airstrike a mistake, only to be followed by a claim that suspected bandits had embedded themselves among civilians. It's this lack of transparency and consistency that underscores the need for an impartial and independent investigation. The call from Amnesty International is clear. The Nigerian authorities, specifically the administration of President Bola Tinubu, must promptly set up an independent inquiry into the incident. If the investigation reveals criminal responsibility, those suspected should be brought to justice in fair trials. It's not just about accountability, but also about the pursuit of justice for the victims and their families. The victims of the airstrike, those who were brutally killed, and those who were severely injured, and their families deserve access to justice and effective remedies. They deserve to have their stories told, their sufferings acknowledged, and their rights upheld. Amnesty International has also highlighted the dire need for the Nigerian military to adhere to international law and respect the sanctity of civilian lives. The organization has pointed out the disturbing trend of deadly consequences for civilians from airstrikes, calling it completely unacceptable. The cry for justice should not go unheard. The cry for justice should not be drowned out by attempts to cover up the truth. The cry for justice should be the catalyst for change, for accountability, and for the protection of human rights. To stay updated on the developments of this story and more, subscribe to Pause and Ponderent. Together we'll keep seeking the truth.